Professional wrestling history is a graveyard of fallen empires. Promotions that were once titans, now just footnotes in a story dominated by one global giant. But among the ghosts of these fallen kingdoms, one stands out, not because it was conquered, but because it held the key to its own salvation, and threw it away. This is the story of the American Wrestling Association, a wrestling empire built on real athletic credibility that made one single fateful decision. This is how one man's refusal to crown his biggest star didn't just cost him a champion, it cost him his kingdom. And in doing so, he accidentally birthed the global phenomenon that would change pop culture forever. This is the story of the night the AWA said no to Hulk Hogan. He was a cultural earthquake. In the early 1980s, Hulk Hogan wasn't just a superstar, he was a force of nature. In the American Wrestling Association, he was selling out arenas, moving merchandise like crazy, and creating a fan frenzy the old guard had never seen. He was a license to print money. But the one man who held the keys to the kingdom, AWA founder Verne Gagne, refused to open the door. This is the story of how a single word, no, toppled an empire and created a global powerhouse. We're going to uncover the reasons behind this disaster, the backroom deals, the clash of egos, and the stubborn philosophy that changed wrestling forever. To really get the weight of Verne Gagne's decision, you have to understand the man and the empire he built. Long before sports entertainment, wrestling was run by a territorial system. It was a patchwork of promotions across North America, each with its own champion and its own borders. And in the American Midwest, the undisputed king was the American Wrestling Association. The AWA was founded in 1960 by Verne Gagne, and Verne wasn't just some promoter, he was a product of the system he championed. A decorated amateur wrestler, Gagne was a two-time NCAA champion and even an alternate for the 1948 U.S. Olympic team. He'd had a brief run in the NFL before realizing pro wrestling was where the real money was. The guy's credentials? They were legit, and he built his promotion in his own image. Gagne's AWA was the home of real wrestling. He valued technical skill and amateur backgrounds above all else. His philosophy was simple. The champion should be a master of the craft, a technician who could handle himself in a legitimate fight. Gagne himself was a 10-time AWA World Heavyweight Champion. He set the standard. The AWA champ wasn't a cartoon character. He was a serious, formidable athlete. Throughout the 60s and 70s, this formula worked. The AWA was a star factory, with Gagne's legendary, grueling training camp in his barn producing a who's who of future icons, including a young Ric Flair. The promotion sold out venues from Minneapolis to Chicago, becoming a powerhouse. The face of the company in the early 80s was Nick Bockwinkel, a man who was everything Gagne wanted in a champion. Bockwinkel was articulate, intelligent, and a master in the ring, the perfect wrestler's wrestler. The AWA was a kingdom built on tradition and legitimacy. But a cultural tidal wave of neon, rock music, and larger-than-life characters was on the horizon, and Verne Gagne, standing proudly on his mountain of tradition, didn't see it coming. Then, in 1981, a 6'7", 300-pound mountain of muscle named Terry Bollea walked into the AWA. Wrestling fans knew him as Hulk Hogan. He was on the outs with the World Wrestling Federation after its owner, Vince McMahon Sr., took issue with him taking an unapproved role in a major movie. That role, as the charismatic monster Thunder Lips in Rocky III, had turned him into a pop culture sensation overnight. Hogan called Gagne, thinking about quitting wrestling, but Gagne saw a clear opportunity. He brought Hogan in as a heel, but the audience's reaction was immediate and undeniable. They didn't care that he was supposed to be the bad guy. They saw the 24-inch pythons, the incredible physique, the superhuman charisma, and they were hooked. Hulkamania wasn't born in the WWF. It was born right there in the heart of Gagne's traditionalist territory. Hogan's style was the exact opposite of everything the AWA stood for. He wasn't a technical wizard. His matches were a simple, powerful formula. Take a beating, feel the energy of the crowd, and then the Hulk up, a surge of power leading to a big boot and the atomic leg drop. It was simple, it was repetitive, and it drove audiences completely insane. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. While Gagne and Bockwinkel represented wrestling as a serious sport, Hogan was a rock star, a superhero come to life. Other AWA wrestlers like Jim Brunzell said that Gagne just hated the idea of a musclehead guitar player representing his company. But the fans couldn't get enough. Hogan was selling out arenas and moving merch at a pace the territory had never seen. This created a problem. Hogan was also a massive star in Japan, where he was making a fortune. But back in the AWA, Verne Gagne controlled all the merchandise and pocketed most of the money, a standard practice that a star of Hogan's size was no longer willing to accept. The tension was building. On one side, you had a cultural phenomenon rewriting the rules. On the other, a promoter who believed in the old ways, holding all the power, the money, and the championship. Something had to give. The conflict between Gagne's traditionalism and the unstoppable force of Hulkamania finally boiled over on one fateful night, April 24th, 1983. The event was called Super Sunday, held in the AWA's heartland at the St. Paul Civic Center. The main event was the one everyone was waiting for. AWA World Heavyweight Champion Nick Bockwinkel defending against the People's Champion Hulk Hogan. The atmosphere was electric. Nearly 20,000 fans were packed in, absolutely buzzing for a Hogan victory. For almost 20 minutes, the two fought a match that perfectly summed up their conflicting styles. Hogan the powerhouse versus Bockwinkel the cunning champion. Then, it happened. Hogan hulked up, hit the leg drop, and covered Bockwinkel. 1, 2, 3. The arena exploded. For a glorious moment, it was real. Gene Okerlund hit the ring to interview the new champion as Hogan held the AWA belt high. It was the coronation of a new king, and just as quickly, it was ripped away. The ring announcer delivered the devastating news. AWA President Stanley Blackburn, a figurehead appointed by Gagne, had reversed the decision. The reason? Hogan had thrown Bockwinkel over the top rope earlier in the match, an illegal move in the AWA. Hogan was disqualified. Bockwinkel was still the champion. The crowd went from pure joy to stunned silence, and then to pure rage. Gagne had used a classic, frustrating booking trick, a tactic that would later become famously known as a dusty finish, giving the fans what they wanted, only to snatch it away on a technicality. Gagne thought this would make fans desperate to see Hogan finally win for good. Instead, it did the exact opposite. It was a bait and switch that infuriated the audience and, more importantly, sent a crystal-clear message to Hulk Hogan. Verne Gagne was never really going to give him the ball. That night in St. Paul wasn't the start of a boom period. It was the beginning of the end for the AWA. That finish at Super Sunday wasn't just a random booking decision. It was the result of a bitter conflict happening behind the scenes. Verne Gagne's refusal to put the belt on Hogan came down to two things: his philosophy and his wallet. First, it was the clash of styles. To Gagne, the AWA World Champion had to be a wrestler, a legit, technically sound athlete. Hogan, with his power moves and limited moveset, just didn't fit Verne's idea of a champion. He saw him as a great attraction, but not the guy to carry the title's credibility. He truly believed the real money was in Hogan chasing the belt, not holding it. Second, and maybe even more important, it was about the money. Hulkamania was a merchandising goldmine, but in the AWA, the promoter controlled the profits. Gagne was pocketing most of the money from Hogan's merchandise and his big money tours in Japan. As Hogan got more popular, he demanded a bigger piece of the pie. The story goes that a plan was in place for Hogan to win the title, but only if he agreed to give Gagne the majority of his merch and Japan earnings. Hogan countered with a 50-50 split. Gagne flatly rejected it. This financial standoff was the real deal-breaker. Gagne wouldn't give up a huge chunk of his profits, and Hogan wouldn't be the company's biggest star without being paid like it. This stalemate had bigger consequences. There were reports that the AWA was in talks with the CBS television network for a major special, one that could have put them on a national stage and let them compete with the expanding WWF. But with Gagne and Hogan at a standstill, those talks fell apart. The opportunity was gone. Verne's old-school mindset, where the promoter held all the cards, was crashing headfirst into a new reality where a superstar knew his own worth. Verne had a choice: adapt and share the wealth, or stick to his principles and risk losing it all. He chose his principles. By the end of 1983, the situation was a ticking time bomb. While Verne Gagne was holding firm, another promoter with a totally different vision was making his move. That promoter was Vince McMahon Jr. In late 1983, McMahon secretly approached Hogan with an offer he couldn't refuse: the WWF Championship and the starring role in his plan for national domination. For Hogan, who was creatively and financially frustrated in the AWA, the choice was obvious. The end came fast. On December 21st, 1983, a letter arrived for Verne Gagne from Florida. It was short and to the point. "I'm not coming back." Signed, Hulk Hogan. Gagne, used to playing pranks with another promoter, apparently dismissed it as a joke and threw it away. He just couldn't imagine his top star would actually walk out. He learned the truth 4 days later. Christmas night 1983 was one of the biggest nights of the year for the AWA. The St. Paul Civic Center was sold out, with Hogan advertised for the main event. As showtime got closer, there was still no Hogan. A frantic Greg Gagne, Verne's son, got Hogan on the phone. "Hey, big man, what are you doing? We've got matches down here," Greg pleaded. Hogan's response was a death knell. He calmly said, "I'm gonna go with the WWF." When Greg protested, telling him that's not how you do business after he'd already promoted the big holiday shows, Hogan delivered the final crushing blow. He revealed that Vince McMahon was paying him more money to simply stay home and not work the AWA shows than he would have made from the entire tour. That phone call was the sound of an empire collapsing. This wasn't just a wrestler leaving. It was a shift in the entire power dynamic of the industry. The gentlemen's agreements of the territory days were dead. A new, more aggressive era had begun. Hogan had no-showed the AWA's biggest event of the year, leaving a sold-out arena and a bewildered promoter behind. He was heading back to the WWF, and this time, he was going to take the wrestling world with him. Vince McMahon didn't just stumble into this opportunity, he engineered it. Signing Hogan wasn't just getting a new wrestler, it was a calculated act of war designed to conquer the entire wrestling landscape. To achieve his national vision, the territories had to be destroyed. His pursuit of Hogan was just the start. McMahon's strategy was ruthless. He had already tried to buy the AWA outright, but Gagne refused, feeling the offer was too low. After Gagne's camp dropped McMahon at the airport, Vince allegedly turned and said, "Verne, I don't negotiate." Since he couldn't buy the AWA, he decided to dismantle it piece by piece. Paying Hogan to no-show Christmas was just one move. The assault didn't stop there. McMahon started systematically raiding the AWA's roster. He didn't just take wrestlers, he took the soul of its broadcast. He lured away beloved announcer Mean Gene Okerlund, brilliant manager Bobby the Brain Heenan, and charismatic commentator Jesse the Body Ventura. In one move, the entire on-air personality of the AWA was gutted and transplanted to the WWF. McMahon's invasion hit the airwaves too. In a direct attack, he started buying up the AWA's television time slots in key cities, paying stations to drop AWA programming and replace it with his own. Without their top star and with their TV presence shrinking, the AWA was being choked out. Gagne was notoriously cheap with payoffs, which made it easy for McMahon to lure talent away with better money and the bright lights of Madison Square Garden. While Gagne was playing by the old, unwritten rules, McMahon was playing a different game entirely, one of hostile takeovers and corporate warfare. Just 9 months after the Super Sunday disaster, on January 23, 1984, Hulk Hogan defeated the Iron Sheik at Madison Square Garden to become the WWF champion. Hulkamania was now running wild for Vince McMahon, and it was about to change everything. Hulk Hogan's departure was a mortal wound that the AWA would never recover from. The promotion began a long, slow, and painful decline. With Hogan gone, Gagne had lost his main attraction, and nobody on the roster could fill that void. The AWA scrambled. They put the title on Stan Hansen, a rugged and respected brawler, but his reign ended in one of the most bizarre ways imaginable. When asked to drop the title back to Nick Bockwinkel, Hansen reportedly refused, left the building, ran over the championship belt with his truck, and mailed the battered remains back to Gagne. It was a perfect, tragic metaphor for the crumbling prestige of the AWA title. While the AWA floundered, the WWF, powered by Hulkamania, exploded. The Rock and Wrestling Connection, WrestleMania, and Hogan on MTV made the WWF a global pop culture phenomenon. The AWA just seemed like a relic. Gagne's insistence on pushing his less charismatic son, Greg Gagne, as a top star was met with accusations of nepotism and just didn't connect with audiences. The talent drain continued. Future megastars like Curt Hennig, Shawn Michaels, and Scott Hall all passed through the AWA, but the promotion couldn't hold on to them. It became a developmental territory, a place to get experience before making real money in the WWF. By the time of the disastrous Super Clash 3 pay-per-view in 1988, where Gagne reportedly failed to pay many of the wrestlers, the AWA's reputation was shot. The end finally came in 1991. Plagued by tiny crowds, a depleted roster, and a fatal inability to adapt, the American Wrestling Association filed for bankruptcy. The truth is, the company had been dying for years. It died the moment Verne Gagne decided his philosophy was more important than his biggest star. It died on Christmas night, 1983, with a sold-out arena and a no-show main eventer. The king was so busy guarding the traditions of his castle that he failed to notice his kingdom was already gone. So, when the dust settled, who was really to blame for the death of this once great promotion? The overwhelming consensus points right at its founder, Verne Gagne. His rigid, old-school mentality was his fatal flaw. By refusing to put the championship on Hulk Hogan, Gagne made a catastrophic business error based on his personal taste in wrestlers, a style the public was leaving behind. The money dispute was just as critical. Gagne's unwillingness to share the revenue with the man generating it was incredibly short-sighted. As his own son, Greg, has recounted, this stubbornness pushed Hogan directly into Vince McMahon's arms. Gagne held a winning lottery ticket and refused to cash it because he didn't like the font. But there is a counter-argument. Some historians have argued that Gagne was just trying to protect his brand. To him, the AWA title represented a standard of technical wrestling, and putting it on a showman like Hogan would have betrayed that identity. This view suggests that even if Gagne had made Hogan champion, the lure of McMahon's money and national TV machine was so strong that Hogan probably would have left anyway. There's even a persistent, though unproven, rumor that a furious Gagne offered the Iron Sheik, a man he had trained, a large sum of money to legitimately break Hogan's leg during the WWF title change. True or not, it shows how deep the feeling of betrayal ran. Ultimately, while McMahon's aggressive tactics were a huge factor, the fall of the AWA rests on Gagne's shoulders. He failed to see that wrestling was evolving from a pseudo-sport into mainstream entertainment. He had the single hottest commodity in the entire industry right when it was about to explode, and he let him walk away over pride and money. He might not have been able to stop the McMahon juggernaut forever, but by saying no to Hogan, he surrendered without even putting up a fight. The story of the AWA and Hulk Hogan isn't just business, it's a wrestling tragedy. It's a tale of a king so devoted to the laws of his kingdom that he couldn't see the world changing outside his castle walls. Verne Gagne built an empire on legitimacy, creating a star factory that produced some of the greatest talents ever. But when faced with a cultural revolution called Hulkamania, he chose tradition over evolution and sealed his own fate. That decision didn't just kill a territory, it changed the course of wrestling history. It directly fueled the WWF's global explosion and laid the foundation for the sports entertainment monopoly we see today. It's one of the greatest what-ifs in wrestling. What if Gagne had just said yes? What if he put the belt on Hogan, shared the money, and built his company around the biggest star on the planet? Could the AWA have survived? We'll never know. What we do know is that one decision turned a thriving empire into a ghost and created the very force that would one day own its history. We want to hear from you in the comments. If Verne Gagne had put the title on Hulk Hogan in 1983, could the AWA have stood a chance against Vince McMahon and the WWF? Let us know what you think. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more deep dives into wrestling history. Thanks for watching.